All right. Okay, so now we are live. Hello, everybody. How's it going? Let's see.
Hey, everyone.
Let's see. We got Moat in the chat. Hey, Moat. How's it going? Start Answer 58. He Start Answer. Witchy Jim. And cool. So I was letting people know in the chat that Dorian probably won't be joining us. He has some personal stuff going on, so he might be out for a little bit, but hopefully he'll join us later on.
And sorry, I was gonna say I hope everything goes okay with that as well.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I hope so too. Hope everything's okay. Let me see. Do we have any updates on anything?
Not that I can think of at the immediate moment. I got at least 4 more pages done in the D&D stories, so this should be fun.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And any updates on that? Like, have more people sent you characters, or?
Not that I have gotten. I have still the same characters from before. I think I'm waiting on 1 or 2 things, like the confirmation from Moat, and just that, because I have pretty much everything else, and I'm waiting on character sheets after that. So.
And when are we actually going to start it?
I believe that was in late April to, was it April or May we talked about? I think it was in May.
Wow. Okay, so we're pushing it a whole another month.
Hold on, I'm double checking my calendar real quick, okay, because I remember I wrote it down on there. Oh, it's on the 8th of April.
Oh, okay.
So I need everything in by April 1st. No, it's not an April Fool's Day joke. And I will be okay with it coming in and up till any time till the 5th, because I do understand that April 1st is also Easter and people might want to do stuff with their family.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just got an update from Moat. He'll have to pass. Okay.
Okay. So, all right. So we'll have to. So everybody will have to get their characters in and communicate with you by the 5th of April.
Yep, by the 5th of April.
Okay. Cool. All right. Good. And let's see. Is that pretty much it?
Yes, that's about it on my end. I'll periodically be muting myself because my rabbit and others in the background.
Okay. All right. And let's see. And so I named this episode Naughty Pugs Fuck Off because of the stuff that's been going on in the news lately. I don't know if any of you have heard, but there was this guy. He was an online, he was somebody who posts videos and stuff, and I only had a few subscribers, but he taught his girlfriend's pug to salute, to do a Nazi salute whenever he said Sieg Heil, and this went against the law. It was interpreted by the Scottish law to have violated a 2003 law that they had that Scotland had put on the books, or the UK had put on the books, about using social media and online things to promote hate speech, and they considered this to be an offensive hate speech, and that's what he was charged with. But his whole life has been thrown into the media, and yes, he's been going to court, and yes, he might get sentenced. Probably won't get a big sentence, but in the meantime, everything in his life has been thrown up in the air. He's been thrown into the public eye. He's been scrutinized. Everybody, half the internet is kind of like behind him, saying, hey, it's just a joke, let it go. And then the other half is saying, oh, well, he's a Nazi white supremacist spreading this. He's supporting it. And this whole white supremacist Nazi crap has reached the point of a moral panic, in my opinion, because it is now to the point where everybody is afraid of, you know, being called a Nazi and being labeled as a Nazi. And once you get labeled that, then, you know, all the other justifications of, you know, some people believe if you're a Nazi, it's actually justified to commit violence against you. And then, you know, it's just ridiculous. So anyhow, so I just thought I would post, I would call this episode Nazi Pugs Fuck Off. I mean, I think it's funny because I know that when I was younger, I did all kinds of stupid stuff that if it was ever put onto the internet, I would feel so embarrassed about. But, you know, people do stupid things, and, you know, it's just, it's really, in my opinion, it's just ridiculous. It obviously wasn't meant as legitimate. It wasn't meant as a legitimate hate. It wasn't deliberate. It was a obvious joke, but it's been taken serious, and because it's been taken serious, there's a certain element of power that you give something if you take it seriously, and so it's just been really ridiculous. What do you
What do you think about it?
Oh shit!
Sorry, my
I spilled something.
well, my mic actually, the call cut out for a second. Were you asking what I actually felt about it?
Yeah, I was actually what your thoughts are on it.
My thoughts are that, yeah, it was a stupid joke. It was just that, a stupid joke. And he's even apologized and said that it wasn't meant to be offensive. He even said that off the bat. He just is doing something to annoy his girlfriend. So the fact that they're taking that extreme to a joke compared to actual shit that's going on is what upsets me more. That they're pretty much ignoring a lot of the other stuff going on and just focusing on this one thing, which it shouldn't be news. It shouldn't have happened in the first place with the arrest, and it shouldn't even be news. There has to be something better that needs to be news. I feel sorry for the guy. Yeah. Meow.
Yeah. So, Richie Jim saying that they pulled a Nazi sub out of Niagara Falls.
Oh, yeah. That's not true. That's another fake news.
Has anybody heard anything about that? I guess not.
Sorry, I was just yelling at Soren.
Oh, that's okay.
But no, as far as I know, the last couple of weeks, some divers discovered it. It's on Google somewhere. I kind of want to. I don't. I may have to Google this because it sounds too hard to be true. Actually, it has to be fake news. Let me find out. God damn it.
I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to figure out exactly where, because Niagara Falls is up in the northern states, right? Isn't it like on the edge of Canada and the United States?
Fat checks. It's a false story.
Yeah.
A nuclear submarine mysteriously surfaced in Lake Ontario, which is off of the Niagara Falls. Okay, that's Great Lakes. Apparently, the only thing I'm seeing in Google from it is from the World News Daily Report.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's... Yeah, no, it's not a true story. Because it's not from Niagara Falls, it's from the lake underneath it. It's not a true story. There's more saying that it's a false heading than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it sounds really unusual
Yeah.
I don't believe they had any submarines come that far. I mean, it is within the realm of possibility, but you know, chances are no. So, well, anyhow, it's just funny nowadays because it's funny because often what happens with the internet is a false story or a misleading story will spread farther than, you know, somebody revealing the truth about it, you know. So what do they say? You know, lies travel faster than the truth. So
lies flies, the truth lingers.
yeah, something like that. So it's pretty funny.
It is, and the fact that I'm like, no, this can't be real, and I have to actually go look it up says a lot about our news nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah. And don't feel bad with you, Jen. There's all kinds of stuff that, you know I've posted stuff on like Facebook and or retweeted stuff that later on is found out to be untrue. And then I feel stupid for it. Hell, I even did a video. Remember that I did a video on this guy who supposedly had a Nazi haircut and he was attacked. And I did a whole video on it. And it turned out to be false. What happened was the guy had cut his own hand and then went to the police and made up the whole story.
Oh yeah, I remember that douchebag.
Yeah. Yep. So I made a whole video on it and everything and put it up, and then later on found out it was false. You know, so it's like, fuck. So much bullshit going on out there. It's hard to know what to believe. You have to like question every little thing. It's ridiculous. But I mean, that's the age of information. You know, that's what we have access to. We have access to all kinds of information, but not all of it's true. You know, same thing with the witchy pagan community. There's a lot of people making videos on stuff, but not all of it is good information. A lot of it is really just dumb information, stuff that people have tacked on and believe and slapped in and all kinds of stuff. So, you know, you just have to kind of take everything with a grain of salt and sort of, you know, question it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying I'm the best teacher out there by any means, but I have come across a lot of people who have done certain things like that. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. Even I know this.
Yep. Yeah. So I mean, it's really weird. So every time I see like a story or something, and I kind of go, wait, that doesn't really sound right, or it sounds unusual. Chances are you probably want to check it out. You know, fact check it.
Yeah.
To make sure it's legit. And then the other thing is that you'll have people who write articles like BuzzFeed and some other ones where they'll tell a story, but what they do is they report on it in such a way where it's skewed. It's skewed towards the direction that they want to portray, their agenda that they want to push forward. And so they'll not necessarily lie, but what they'll do is they'll emphasize an element of the story and then leave out a very important element. For example, people who are killed by police. Oftentimes, people who are killed by police are reaching for a weapon. They're fighting with the officer. They're resisting arrest. There's all these elements that happen before the camera starts to roll, or there are elements of a story that people will leave out. It's not just some innocent person walking down the street and suddenly a cop jumps out of the bushes and says, freeze, and then they get scared and they run and get shot. That's not how it happens. For example, you know, who was it? There was this giant. I mean, he was like 6'4", 6'3". I think his name is Dan Brown. But he was in a convenience store and just took something off the shelf and just started walking out the door. And the little Chinese guy who owned the store was trying to stop him, and he was just pushing him out of the way. This guy was a complete bully, a thug bully, and just pushed him out. And there's footage of it. You can look it up. And and then the police were called, and the police came, and the police tried to talk to him, and the guy punched the officer and tried to take his gun, and then ran, and then the police shot him. So the only story that you hear is, you know, this guy was running away from the police and was shot in the back. That's not the entire story. There's more to it than just that, you know. So I mean, that's just an example. So you just have to be cautious about stuff that they report on, because they have an agenda, and you know, and there are instances where stuff happens that should be checked into, but you know, often at times when a police officer pulls their gun out, they're not just, there's a reason why a police officer pulls a gun out.
Yeah, they just don't pull it out just for the fun of it.
Yeah. I mean, I've had, unfortunately, when I was younger, I had a lot of run-ins with police, and I met a lot of police officers that were pretty much dicks. And then there were a lot of officers who were just, you know, they're just kind of doing their job, and they actually want to help the community. And yeah, sometimes you have to deal with those dick officers, but if you cooperate with the police and you don't, you know, even if they are being a dick and you're just being nice about it and you have your day in court, you usually go home unharmed. But however, if you resist or do anything, you might not make it home that night. So
yeah,
that's something to think about too. Let me see. All right, so let's see. We got I Am Trash in the chat. Hello again, I Am Trash. I haven't seen you for a while. People are talking about TMZ and Alex Jones.
Oh yeah.
Alex Jones is a good example of fake news.
He's an excellent example of fake news. He's walking fake news.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So, all right. Well, anything else? Anything else going on? Any thoughts?
No, I think we should get right into this video of doom.
All
doom,
right.
doom, 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 doom.
And Ray's the Village is with us. Hey, Ray's, how's it going? All right. Let me see. To everyone, can you see the video?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay.
I was having trouble finding my mute button.
That's all right. And then just let me know how it sounds too.
I can hear it perfectly fine.
Okay, good.
A lot of people suffer from sleep paralysis. It's been reproduced in laboratories using blindfolds and LEDs. They can actually recreate it in a lab. And a lot of the test subjects said they saw an entity at the foot of their bed or close to them. And some of them said it looked like a gray alien, a big-eyed alien. Some of them said it looked like maybe a dark entity or maybe an old hag or something like that.
So it sounds like what he's talking about is sleep paralysis. Now, sleep paralysis is a condition that affects a lot of people. I've never experienced it, but I've heard other people talk about it, and it sounds really scary. But it sounds like a physiological cause. It sounds like something that, you know, it's not caused by demons or little gray aliens. So that's kind of, it sounds like that's what they're talking about. And I've heard that from other Christians before, that somehow they believe that sleep paralysis is caused by demons and whatnot. You know, I mean, it's just, that's just utter bullshit.
It's an ancient phenomenon that's been going on since the beginning of mankind. There are those that say it's purely psychological or many can explain it naturally by the many means that exist. And I understand the scientific perspective. And for a long time, I've called this paranormal version of sleep paralysis as false sleep paralysis because it involves actual demonic entities. This version has happened to me a good 5 times. 2 of the times I saw what looked like a gray, big-headed, big black-eyed gray alien. The last time it happened to me was in the year 2014. I remember it happened about 3 months before the movie The Guardians of the Galaxy came out.
What the hell is going on with this guy's background? Does this guy like do some kind of a show or something? He's got, like,
might.
Yeah.
Or he just has his tech room decked out to look like the hull of an alien spacecraft.
Yeah.
And he's talking about them.
Yeah, but it's right. Okay, so maybe he does some kind of a podcast or YouTube channel on aliens or something, because it looks completely like props. You know, it looks like props you would see in some kind of a like a show, like an Elvira show or something. You know.
Yeah.
Because I remember watching that movie and seeing a familiar face. Now, I'm not familiar with the Guardians of the Galaxy, never read the comic book, was never exposed to it. I've been to a couple comic book shops in my life, but I never picked up that comic book, never heard of it. But the last time I had a sleep paralysis incident was in 3 months before Guardians of the Galaxy came out. The entity felt like it was on top of me, choking me.
So how is he making a connection between sleep paralysis and the movie Guardians of the Galaxy?
Because I think one of the characters looked like, quote unquote, somebody in that he saw choking him. So I want to say you got sleep paralysis from a bad choking porno nightmare.
And I closed my eyes. And I tried to see what the entity looked like. I couldn't see with my eyes open, but I closed my eyes and I tried to see it. And I saw it. Rare scenario, rare occasion. Yeah,
but you created the image in your imagination. You didn't see it. You saw it with your mind's eye, but what you were doing was you were imagining what it was. So it wasn't that you were seeing it.
I can rarely see these things. 2 times I saw a gray alien like at the foot of my bed. But this time I saw it on top of me. And its face was completely pitch black. Its eyes were pitch black.
But again, this is what he imagined. It wasn't what he saw.
And I think it had black hair or a black hood, or black hair and a black hood. Long black hair and a black hood, I believe. And the entity's face looked like it was made out of wood. It looked, to me, almost exactly like Groot's face in Guardians of the Galaxy. This was 3 months before the movie came out. I had never seen a preview for the movie up to this point.
Hold up. If you look at the original The Mask movie with Jim Carrey in it, the mask before he puts it on looks like Groot, but green. So he could have, I hate to say this, but because I know a lot of people who've had sleep paralysis before, I've listened to a lot of videos on it. Sometimes you pull something that you have seen it passively, or just even from when you were a kid, and you kind of manifest that into things that you see when you're having these episodes, or things you imagine. And sometimes it can look just like it, or it can alter it to a bit where it looks a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not challenging sleep paralysis, because sleep paralysis is a condition that affects people. What I'm challenging is his assertion that somehow there's some entity causing it to happen. I don't believe that. I don't believe that there And the reason why I don't believe it is because I don't believe there's enough evidence to prove it, you know? And
I'm with you on that one.
yeah, and everything that every piece of information that you would use to either imagine something or whatever is information that you have gathered either consciously or unconsciously. So
Yeah.
if you are let's say you're riding the bus home or you're driving down the street and you're going from point A to point B, you may not be consciously aware of everything that is entering your field of vision or your hearing, but all the stuff that you are seeing around you and all the stuff that you are hearing around you it becomes part of either your subconscious or your conscious mind. Now, this doesn't have an overwhelming effect. It's not like, you see an advertisement for something and you're going to suddenly run out and buy it. It doesn't affect you that way, but you do become aware of it. It does enter your consciousness. So later on that night, you might have a dream or you might have a vision of something, and that particular element may enter into it because it's now part of your subconscious and your consciousness. Now, alternatively, if something is not part of your consciousness or it's not part of your subconscious, you're going to have a very hard time imagining it. Like, for example, if I said, what a doobapapa is, you would have no idea what the hell that is because you've never ever encountered it. You've never seen it. You've never heard it. You don't know what the hell that is. So you have no frame of mind or no reference point to imagine what that would be. So that's another element of it. So if something enters your consciousness everything that enters your consciousness is going to have a source. There's no way you can imagine something that you have never, ever experienced because it's just not part of your consciousness or your subconscious. Anyhow, that was a long little ramble.
It didn't look exactly like Groot. Groot looks like a tree. Groot is brown, kind of with black eyes. This entity was pitch black, but still Groot face-ish looking, with the little broken wooden tree bark looking face. With the beady black eyes, it looked like it had black hair and possibly a black hood. I only saw it for a few seconds with my eyes closed. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't see it, but I could still feel the choking. It was on top of me, choking me. I fought it and fought it and fought it, and it finally disappeared and I was able to move. Now, scientists are going to say it's simply your imagination, but he was extremely lucid. I could see it. Sleep paralysis and lucid dreams actually many times go hand in hand. Some people have commented that sleep paralysis is the beginning stages to the breaking into another dimension or being abducted, and which actually is very similar to shamanism.
So some people have a really powerful imagination. Imagination is one of the things that definitely, I believe, that helps people in magic. It helps if you can completely imagine something to the point where you can recreate it and you can make it as real as possible in your mind's eye. So, for example, sometimes you'll come across exercises in books where they'll tell you to imagine an apple and then see the apple and then smell the apple and then, see all the elements of the apple and then even taste the apple and hear the apple. And so that you can create in your imagination that object or whatever it is that that you're imagining as real as possible in your mind, so that it has all of the elements that a real apple would have, except that apple is not real. It's imagined. And that's, you want to be able to focus your attention on that for a certain period of time and be able to build upon it. There are people, unfortunately, who lack this ability. They can't really imagine it. They can sort of, and then they lose it. You know, they can't really imagine an apple. They can't smell an apple in their mind. They can't taste an apple in their mind. They can't hear it. You know, they can't even feel it or, you know, like give it weight. And some people lack that ability. And then other people have a very vivid imagination and they're able to do that. Usually creative, artistic types have a very strong imagination because they're able to recreate these images or create an image that doesn't exist and then, you know, create it in a physical form in one way or the other.
Shamanism involves taking a shamanistic drug and hallucinogenic, which
what the hell is a shamanistic drug?
I don't know. Is he talking about shrooms, peyote, pot?
It really depends upon which culture you're talking about, you know?
Yeah, and not all shamans do that.
Mm-hmm.
So he's just pretty much doing a blanketed terminology on all but some. But at the same time, I don't think most modern day shamans do that, do they?
And again, it really depends upon the culture, you know? Like there's shamans in South America that use drugs. I mean, yes, shamans do. I think it's safe to say that shamans do use drugs as part of their ceremonies, but not all, like you said, not all shamans do. And also it depends upon which culture you're talking about. Like I'm sure that marijuana, cannabis has been used by various cultures to, you know, as a drug, you know, peyote or mescaline or psilocybin, or all these various drugs. I mean, even the flying ointments that we have records of today and people have been able to recreate was probably a form of early shamanic, you know, priestly European drug that was used by people as part of, you know, like maybe an initiation ceremony or possibly as a maybe traveling to the other world. And we have records of it today. And it was, you know, made up of belladonna, aconite, what else? Datura. There was several of these drugs that were used, and it was, you know, topically used, and it gives the person sensation of flying. And this was probably a drug that goes all the way back to early, you know, I don't know, quote unquote shamanic, but it was part of probably this priestly practice that went farther back than the 13th century. Probably went, you know, who knows how far back it went. But that's an example of it. But there is no quote unquote shamanic drug that everybody uses.
Yeah.
I've never taken, but shamanism involves taking that shamanistic drug and you breaking free into the other dimension, and you can see like a lucid dream that's all crazy. And Joe Rogan talks about this. Joe Rogan takes DMT and all kinds of hallucinogenics, so perhaps you can reproduce it with drugs. I wouldn't recommend that in any way, shape, or form. As far as those trying to induce lucid dreams or out-of-body experiences, you know, I'm pretty neutral to the subject, but I think you can gain some insight, but you can also, who knows? I heard there was a guy.
So I've heard this too, that, you know, just taking a drug, just to take the drug without really any context of what might encounter or what might enter your consciousness during this quote unquote travel or this experience can be dangerous, in the sense that it can it can cause your experience to be not helpful. It can cause your experience to be a negative one. Oftentimes, part of a ceremony of using drugs, for example, shoot, what is the name of it? There's a drug that they used in South America, some tribe in South America, where they would tell, like, the kid, because he would be growing into adulthood, and they would be on the cusp of going from being a child into an adult. And so part of the ceremony, they would take this drug. And the witch doctor, the shaman, would tell them exactly what's going to happen, which spirit they're going to encounter, what is going to happen, how to handle it. So they basically tell this kid who's going to be experiencing this drug for the very first time what is going to happen and how they experience it, and how, which spirits are the good spirits and which ones are the bad spirits, so that the kid is prepared for it. And he goes into the whole situation mentally prepared, knowing the mythology around this, knowing sort of what's going to happen. So it's not like, you decide to have a shamanic experience, so you go to your local drug dealer, buy a drug, go home and take the drug, and then, have your shamanic experience. That's kind of that's like a simulated, you're recreating, but it's not the actual experience. They teach you everything that's going to happen with it.
Yeah, they walk you through it so that you're not scared, surprised, or anything like that, or you freak out. I mean, if you are somebody who, or never done something like that before, it can be, like you said, very scary, very freaky. The upside is at least they walk walk the youth through it, so they don't have that freak out moment, so they don't have that fear, so that they can feel comfortable where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I know that's with a lot of other things. Some people, it's kind of like with guided meditation. You're more comfortable if you perceive that that you're going through a guided tour of something, because somebody's there to lead you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I see it. But you're right. There's no drug out there that just says, here is a shamanic drug that will give you a hallucination, and you have to just figure out what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who focused his entire life, the rest of his life, on trying to reproduce an out-of-body experience he had. And so I guess it can be addicting to a certain extent. I'm happy being...
I don't understand how we would be addicting. I mean, it's again, it's different. There's a whole purpose and a use for that particular drug. It's considered to be sacred. Like, for example, it's called the ambrosia of the gods. Giving a term to it. There's a whole purpose for that drug. It's not like today where people use it recreationally.
Yeah.
There's an actual purpose to it. So the idea that somebody would become addicted to it that's a very modern problem. People didn't just take these drugs just for the hell of it. There was a whole reason for it. There was a purpose for it.
In my body. Thank you very much. I think in the future, I'll have plenty of opportunity to be out of my body. The following story is good evidence sleep paralysis is demonic in nature. This incident involves two witnesses who both experienced the demonic paralysis at the same time in the same room.
So this is the funniest thing. It always comes down to this. Every time I ask people about, like, people who claim that they experienced some kind of satanic ritual abuse, and I ask them, specifics and all this stuff, it always comes down to what they claim to have seen, what other people claim to have seen. So it always comes down to what you see and what you experience, and they use that as their evidence. But You know, unfortunately, our mind plays tricks on us. We remember things incorrectly. Although our experiences are, we believe that they're completely real. Sometimes they're not real. They're imagined. Sometimes they're dreams that we had forgotten about that we remembered, or as in the case of therapy, bad therapy, people sort of they lead you and guide you into it so that you begin to build these memories. And again, you imagine these things and they become very real to you. And then later on, you have a hard time distinguishing what is imagined and what is actually happened to you, what is factual. And I think this is actually something that I should probably do a video on, because it's very, very, very important in magical practice to understand what is imagined and what is real. And this is something that is vitally important because you can trick yourself, you can fool yourself, and you can convince yourself of something that didn't happen. And I think that's one of the reasons why dream diaries are good to have, and also magical diaries are good to have, because you can trick yourself and you can fool yourself. And you know, it happens more commonly than I think people are willing to admit. And sometimes it's tough. You know, it's tough to actually look at your practice and say, you know what, I'm probably imagining that. That probably actually didn't happen. And what actually does happen. And when something does happen, you can't really explain. Chances are that was probably a real event. But if it's something that you just imagined happened and you imagine and you attribute something to it, well, you're kind of fooling yourself. And it can be a very tough straight line to follow. Who knows? Maybe I'll do a video on that someday.
That actually sounds like a kind of a good video topic as well. So
yeah, I'll just add it to the list.
That ever-growing list. Oh God, I hate those lists.
This next incident is a guy named Jeff talking about a time when he was attacked during a sleep paralysis incident. Scientists would say, it's just your imagination and whatever, blah, 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 yada, yada. But there is a second person in the room. While Jeff is being choked by this invisible entity, his friend was sleeping on a sleeping bag on the floor right next to his bed. And his friend, Jeff's friend, could feel the feet of the demonic entity walking on a sleeping bag and stepping on him while he's choking his friend.
You know, it was late at night. I was sleeping, and I heard like the strangest noise. It sounded like white noise, like a shh.
I talked about this astral plane white noise sound that you hear when you are beginning to enter the astral plane with Brandon Young in a previous video podcast. Here is a clip of that conversation. I've heard the astral plane. When I go to sleep, I hear the astral plane at least 2 times a year.
You hear it?
Maybe 3 times a year at most. I hear it when I'm going to bed. Or
how does he know he's hearing the astral plane?
That's a very good question. And why does everybody think it sounds like white noise? Or is that just his opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering how he's made the connection between that noise that he claims to hear and the astral plane. I mean, maybe it's noise that's coming from somewhere else, you know?
Yeah.
Waking up. Accidentally, I'll get in that REM type sleep where I'm still conscious, like a lucid dream type thing. But I hear the astral plane.
Whoa.
And I can describe.
What does it sound like?
It sounds like a cacophony of a million sounds at once.
Right.
It's a million sounds taking place at the same time. and occasionally you'll hear a sound that's louder than the others. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like every sound that ever happened in that room in the history of the universe from A to Z. That's what it sounds like. It was almost like white noise, very loud. As I was going to sleep or waking up, I started hearing this astral realm.
Cacophony, yeah.
Total. And someone else described it to me like an airplane. It sounds like when you're on an airplane, you hear just a generic sound. And now back to Jeff and Jeff's friend and their story of their encounter with a demon involving sleep paralysis.
And I heard like the strangest noise. It sounded like white noise, like a shh. And I was sleeping near the window, so I looked up in the window and I didn't see anything, but I kept hearing that weird, like staticky sounding noise. And then it got louder. And next thing I know, I really couldn't move. It was like strange, like paralyzed, like paralyzed or something. I can't explain it to this day, but it felt like I was paralyzed, and my whole body started to feel really weird. It's like I couldn't move, but I could feel something on my body. It felt really strange. Body weight. Yeah. It was really weird, really intense, because I'd never experienced anything like that ever. The only thing I could think of, like my first reaction was to like try to move or try to like figure out what the heck is going on, but instead of doing that, I just prayed. I did. I called out to the Lord and said, you know, Jesus, protect me in the holy name, and I just kind of rebuked this thing, whatever it was, in the name of Jesus. Called out to him pretty much to help me out and get rid of whatever is in this room with me. And then when I did that,
I'm hearing the astral plane right now in the background.
Here too.
I felt like whatever got me was let go, and I could move again. And I didn't hear that crazy static, but what I did hear was when I was calling out to him, I heard you praying. Yeah, but like, I was praying. But you had the blanket over you, though. Yeah, because I was sleeping on the floor. You remember, like, you know, when you told me later, but I felt a demon walking right on my, the little mattress thing I had on the floor. Yeah. I felt the weight move and stuff, and then, you know, I'm right there, even though I couldn't see it, but I could feel the form of the foot where I had the blankets over me. So the Holy Spirit told me to pray, and I knew it wasn't one of those demons that's going to go choke me out or something like that. So I knew just to be calm and pray. And I was praying, but it was weird. Yeah, he heard me because like you had the blanket over you. Like I know how you sleep. You sleep like me with the blanket completely covered over you. It's not like I could see you praying. Amen. It's not like I didn't hear you. Like I thought you were asleep. Yeah. Oh yeah, but too, you know, you heard me praying, but I wasn't praying with my mouth. Yeah. I was praying from within. You know, but I can hear you. Like I'm talking to you. You'll hear my soul pray. That's what you're hearing. Strange stuff, man. Yeah. And then when I woke up, I told you about it, and you were like, "Yeah, I know." I'm like, what do you mean you know? Like, it was pretty intense, man. And prior to that, I had never had any, you know, strange supernatural experiences. You know, keep in mind too. You know, he gave up all that craziness. You know, there's no drugs in the system. You know, we definitely didn't get high before. You know what I mean? We didn't do nothing crazy. We weren't drunk. No drinking, no, you know what I mean? We weren't doing lines of cocaine. Like exactly. It was a regular day. We probably just playing video games, working on music, and then talking about the Lord, staying kosher, you know, and then just going to sleep, you know. So it was a pretty insane testimony, you know, for like, if anything, I mean, if demons exist, God exists. Exactly. Because demons are nothing but fallen angels.
You see, that's the key right there. If demons exist, then God exists. And that's what I find is the reason why a lot of people perpetuate this belief. They perpetuate the concept of entities, dark forces, demons, and all this stuff. Because if that stuff exists, then that means that obviously God exists too. So it's a way for them to sort of promote their religion and promote their beliefs without exactly promoting their beliefs.
Yeah, it's pretty much the, oh, because this is happening, this has to be true kind of thing. It's, you can't have one without the other in their eyes.
Yep.
Nothing but fallen angels. So if the devil exists and demons exist, trust and believe God exists too. Because God created these things. He created angels. They made their own choice and they fell from grace and they became demons. Mm-hmm. So you gotta take the good with the bad. Demons exist, you know, angels and God exist. Exactly. And his son exists and it's very real. And I 150% believe that it is real. But we're no longer believers, we know it. We know this stuff. We don't have blind faith no more. You know what I mean? It's just we know that, you know, stuff happened to us.
That's two people experiencing sleep paralysis at the exact same time.
Oh, well, that's enough evidence for me. Oh, yeah, it's definite.
And more specifically, experiencing the feet of the invisible entity and the hands of the invisible entity. That's just not explainable by science. The fact is, those two individuals experience an extremely rare attack from a demon, an invisible entity in the higher dimensions of the membranes of this universe.
So not that I don't have any way that I can prove that other dimensions exist. I can fathom it. I can completely see how there could be other dimensions. For example, even in physics, they've believed in the multi-universe theory. You know, the concept that there are multiple multiverses, you know, all around us. And I can also sort of see that. I can imagine that, and I can see how that would work. However, being able to cross from one dimension to the other dimension, there would have to be, like, if you entered into this dimension, you would have to conform to our physical laws, our rules of existence. Same thing if we were going to enter into their dimension or another dimension that existed. You would have to follow certain physical laws. So, for example, the concept of disembodied spirits or entities or ghosts. If ghosts exist and they can pass through things, like they can pass through walls and, you know, they're essentially non-corporal. So you're not going to see them. They're not going to be able to physically interact with your environment. So if that's the case, then chances are they probably can't move objects. They probably can't affect objects. They can't move objects because they pass through objects. So they do not conform, or excuse me, they do conform to our laws. They conform to our rules and our laws of physics. So if it can pass through a wall, how would it be able to choke you? It would be non-corporal. You know?
Yeah, honestly, I would have to agree with you on that. If you're traveling through dimensions, you would take on what that dimension is instead of keeping what you were in your own. So you're right. It probably couldn't do the whole thing. I mean, yeah, I am that person that does believe in ghosts and crap like that. But even I know that the idea of traveling through dimensions, like he's kind of saying on this, is way too far-fetched even for a crazy person like me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty crazy if I say so myself.
Right. So, okay, so do you think that ghosts are, so for example, when you die, your spirit leaves your body and you become a ghost? Or what do you think a ghost is?
What I view most ghostly spirits as is something, I do believe like the whole soul concept, but instead of the soul going to whatever afterlife it's supposed to, it feels trapped here. But I also hold the theory of it could just be residual energy left behind, because we all do leave an energy input, maybe a good or a bad one. If it's bad energy, maybe it's going to do things it shouldn't do, like throw a box at your head. But even with that, within time, that energy will dissipate into nothing. So It all depends. I mean, because some people claim that evil hauntings happen for years and years and years, and some just for 2 weeks or until they light sage or have a prayer or something.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, there are too much that's unexplained for me not to think about. Is there not ghosts? But at the same time, I will try to find logical explanation for the shit. And if it's just residual energy, it's just residual energy.
Mm-hmm. And do you believe that because you mentioned that it might be like residual energy that's left over and then it dissipates over time? Do you believe that ghosts have a certain quote unquote life, or do you think they like permanently exist for eternity?
I'm not actually. I haven't actually thought about that one. That's actually a very good question. I mean, I can see where the ghost could, or the energy could just dissipate over time, or because the imprint or entity decided to stay, it could stay indefinitely depending on the stuff around it. But you hear a lot of stories about this stuff started kicking up when we started doing remaking things or changing things up in a place. I think mostly the reasonings for that is because a lot of the older places that some people do update have different types of wiring, and you're either putting in new wiring or putting wiring in that has never been there before. Like, say, an old mansion that used to only run, an old castle that used to just run on freaking torches and fireplaces. Electromagnetic waves plays a good big part in the whole energy residual thing, in my opinion. So it could be man-made, it could not be man-made. It all depends, really.
Oh, okay, but how? Yeah, but how does that have any effect on whether or not ghosts are permanent or non-permanent?
The lifespan thing, honestly, to me, I don't know. I don't know how to actually answer that one question. I'll be honest with you. It could just be they're feeding off the energy around them to sustain themselves, or something.
And then what? I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here.
Oh no, that's fine.
And then now, what do you believe happens to the soul after it leaves the body? Like, let's say after you die.
After you die, I honestly think. Hold on, real quick. Soren, can you be a little quiet, sweetie? You're picking up on my mic again. I love you. Sorry about that. Anyways, my whole idea on that one, with the soul, I think the soul passes on to the plane of existence that the person believes in for the most part. And even if they don't, they just dissipate and become energy or something. It all depends. I don't know what really does happen to soul. What I hope happens is they go to their afterlife and whatnot. If that part isn't true, I hope we dissipate and become something that helps this world. Could be a lot of different things. There's a lot of different theories, and I mean,
yeah, I know. I know there's all kinds of theories. I was just wondering what you believe, personally. That's
what I believe, like I said, is I hope the soul goes into their version of their afterlife. Like the Summerland or heaven, or if they feel they were that bad of a person, hell, or just their pre-notion and idea of the afterlife is where I hope that soul goes.
Okay, so all right. So it sounds like what happens to people's soul after they die is contingent upon what they believed.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. Thanks for sharing that.
Why would the demon slip up and accidentally reveal itself to two people? I believe it happens occasionally. As a matter of fact, I did experience an extremely horrific nightmare one time. And I was in a dorm room with 3 other guys. There was 2 bunk beds. I had this horrific nightmare. I'll talk about this in a future episode, but this is also a rare shared experience. All 4 of us the next morning confirmed we all had an extremely horrific nightmare, all four of us. And we described it to each other, and it was basically the same nightmare. Four people having the same nightmare and sleeping in the same dorm room, having the same nightmare the same night. That's not a coincidence.
Yeah, but that's also sort of a confirmation bias, because if you sat down and talked with people about things, they probably share something in common, but you're just finding that commonality. So if you're saying that you all had a nightmare, there may be a reason for it, and also you're prodding that. You're sort of creating that that experience, because you're finding that particular element to focus on. You probably all experienced daylight. You all experienced night. You all experienced time. You all experienced hearing sounds. You all experienced, if you were all in the same area, you all experienced the same thing. So that sounds very much like a confirmation bias to me.
Science can't explain that. That was a demonic entity known as an incubus.
Now, how do you know it was a? See, this is the other thing that drives me nuts. How do they know it was a demonic entity that caused this bad dream?
And how do you know it was an incubus? An incubus is a male sex drive demon, where a succubus is a female sex drive demon. So he's saying that this guy potentially might be gay.
I was going to say earlier that it sounded like a bad gay porno, you know, 3 guys in a dorm room.
I think that is a bad gay porno somewhere. I may have to look that up on PornTube just for Pornhub just to find out.
I'm sure it exists.
Probably. But I mean, yeah, why would he immediately jump to it's an incubus? Most guys would jump to it's a succubus before jumping to an incubus.
Good point. Yep.
It was so lazy concerning hiding itself that it gave us all nightmares in a row, or maybe took turns giving us nightmares.
That really sounds like a bad porno now.
And so it slipped up. I know for a fact incubus nightmare demons exist because all 4 of us experienced it. I know the names, the first and last names of those 3 other guys. But for their privacy, I'm not going to mention it because they don't know I'm making this video. This was years ago. This was easily 10 years ago. So what the dream was, oh my gosh, think of the movie Willy Wonka when they go through the tunnel and that creepy movie plays. It's a million times worse than that. The dreams I had and the dreams the other 3 guys had, this joint, multiple merged nightmare that we all had was just, we're talking guts, snakes, bugs, eyeballs, just gross things in your face. It was totally nonsensical, just a bunch of gross imagery, similar to the tunnel imagery in the original Willy Wonka movie.
So, all right. So let's say that, okay, let's run along the premise that incubus, succubus, these demons exist on another plane, and they come in and they cause people to have nightmares and whatnot. What would be the purpose of that?
I mean, I've heard of incubus and succubus. The way they survive is through sexual energy, aka sexual contact with the person in their sleep for some reason. But I don't think they derive off of fear or scare tactics like that. I mean, I've never heard of an incubus or succubus going after somebody for fear reasons.
Right, exactly. So it's like, what would be that doesn't make any sense to me. And yeah, I mean, I've heard of succubi, you know, and so for example, nightmare, you know, was the mythology behind that was it was an actual horse. It was you actually went, you rode on a horse. It was a nightmare, and it journeyed and it took you into your nightmare. And succubi was you would have, especially if you were a male, you would have nocturnal emissions. You would have an orgasm in your sleep that was based upon a dream that you had, and that dream, that was the succubi. That was what caused your nocturnal emissions, and so that's what it was. And then then I'm sure later on, probably maybe there came the concept of an incubi, which was the male version of it, which visited women in their sleep or other men in their sleep and caused them to have, sort of sexual dreams and whatnot. So I can understand where that mythology comes from, but but looking at it from the standpoint of, trying to find the logic in it, what would make sense for an extra dimensional entity to come in and cause people to have nightmares? To me, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
That's proof to me. It's proof enough to me that incubus exist. I've been attacked.
And again, I think you're right, Loki. He's using the word. He doesn't understand what the word is. He probably means succubus, but he's saying incubus.
Yeah, or he has an incubus confused with a different type of demon. It could be because, well, demons have really interesting names sometimes if you actually stop and read some of them. But they are what they are, and I really hope this is an accidental mispronunciation, because if not, you're kind of coming out of the closet, dude.
Yeah, I think he just doesn't know. I think he's just ignorant of it.
Yeah.
Attacked by sleep paralysis demons enough to know that sleep paralysis demons exist. And
so what about people who experience sleep paralysis in other cultures? I mean, is that demons too? I mean, sleep paralysis is just a physical, I mean, it's a condition. I don't exactly understand it that much to know whether it's a psychological condition or a physical condition. It sounds like, from an outsider's perspective, it sounds like to me it's a physical condition based upon psychological conditions, meaning that maybe you imagine, or your mind causes your physical paralysis. That's what it sounds like to me. But again, I could be completely wrong. It could be something else,
And there's the succubus demons.
Oh, okay. So you're right. I mean, so he was using.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm going to back that up just a little bit.
Right.
By sleep paralysis demons enough to know that sleep paralysis demons exist. And then there's the succubus demons, who everyone knows what they do, right? I'm not going to focus on them.
Okay, so he must think that incubus is something else.
Yeah, he must be putting it in a totally different category than a succubus. Because an incubus and a succubus are essentially the same thing, but gender changed.
Mm-hmm.
These are just some of the attributes. Different demons have different talents, but I believe some demons share the same abilities. And these are just some of the abilities that they have. This membrane model that I constructed is based on a biological version of a membrane. No one knows what the different membranes of the universe's separation of dimensions actually looks like, as they are invisible constructs of the universe. But this is a representation of the separations of the different membranes in this universe. And this theory is not mine. This theory is M theory, also known as string theory, also known as superstring theory, also known as membrane theory.
I don't think that I don't think M theory and string theory is the same thing.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, I mean the multi-universe theory. I mean, again, they're just concepts. They haven't been able to prove it. You know, they're still trying to prove dark matter exists. You know, they theorize it, and sometimes theories can be proven to be correct. But oftentimes they're just theories and they don't have enough evidence to actually prove that it exists. And I don't know if they actually believe that multi-dimensions exist, you know, side by side with our dimension, or if they're actually universes that are outside of our universe. You know, like various, for example, like you could imagine our universe as a bubble. And then outside of that bubble, there's another bubble, which is a universe, and then another bubble, another bubble. So it's all these infinite, possibly infinite number of bubbles that exist. That's one concept of what a multiverse is. And the other one is that, yes, they actually exist side by side, and they're sort of separated by this non-penetrable sort of membrane idea. At least that's the way that I've come to understand it. And again, I don't know it that well. You know, I'm not a physicist, so I could be getting it wrong, but that's how I've interpreted it. What do you think about that?
I really, honestly, I do think there could be multiverses out there, but I'm not gonna lie, I haven't really sat there and thought about it a lot. I mean, and they are right, there are two different, they are different, all of them are different theories, not just all the same. But I'm that weird person that I might think of, paranormal stuff, but I don't sit there and think about different, ideas of what the universe could hold, like the multi-theory and multiverse thing, which I do think the multiverse is probably a lot more accurate what could be going on out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I might be the only one who actually sits around and thinks about stuff like this.
String theory is widely accepted among all physicists, scientists, and quantum physicists worldwide. Dr. Michio Kaku talks a lot about them, him being a co-founder of string theory. How many dimensions exist changes from year to year. I believe it's 12 dimensions now, but that is neither here nor there. We live on the 3rd/4th dimension. Just to clarify any confusion for those confused why we live in 2 dimensions at once, the 4th dimension is time, and time really isn't a dimension. It's a trick that scientists use to fool you into confusing you from...
No, scientists do not consider time to be a trick to confuse people. It's basically a measurement. They've also said that time and space are intertwined, so that, you know, and again, I don't quite understand that, but scientists are not trying to fool you.
No, they're not. If anything, this guy is, and all this guy is doing is giving me more of a headache.
Yeah. I mean, I look at time as a measurement. It's a way of measuring moments, a way of measuring things, so that you can measure from this point to a past point, or you can measure from this point to a future point. You know, it's just it's a tool for measurement. But they've also, like I said earlier, they've also intertwined it with space, and that I don't quite understand.
Yeah.
That's why I'm not a physicist, and I just make dumb YouTube videos.
On the 4th. Does anybody think about the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th? Not too often. They usually focus on the 4th. They're so confused on what the 4th is. We live in the 3rd dimension, but a ball exists. Let's say a basketball. A basketball exists in the 3rd dimension, obviously. That basketball takes up space. It takes up time and space. Space and time are the same thing. Time and space are the same thing. When you walk from point A to point B, it's impossible for you to walk from point A to point B without moving in time and moving in space simultaneously. You can't separate the two. Einstein taught us that space-time and time-space are one in the same, inseparable. So that's why when we walk around and move, we have to walk around in space. We have to walk around in time. They're connected. Therefore, we have to walk around in the fourth dimension. It's impossible for a three-dimensional object to exist without it also taking up space. If it takes up space, it also takes up time. Time, space, space, time. We are in the third/fourth dimension. Now, the fifth dimension, there seems to be, because it's obviously so close to us, as of late, or maybe forever, for the infinity of all time, there is a layer of the membrane that thins, that's a lot thinner than, say, our connection to the sixth dimension. Obviously, the closest one is going to be the fifth, and the layer is very thin. I believe it's more than thin. There are virtually vortexes directly to the fifth dimension to a certain extent where they can communicate with us, fifth dimensional entities. This is where it goes off into the paranormal, where scientists will never touch this area. Scientists will spend billions of dollars.
I don't think that they don't touch it. I think that what it is they don't have any proof of it. They don't have, you can measure the first dimension, the second dimension, third dimension, fourth dimension. You can measure those. We can see that. We can actually do it. But once you start going beyond that, you can theorize it. You can theorize all sorts of various things. You can imagine all sorts of crazy stuff in this entire world. But actually proving something exists is the key. That's the other point.
Creating the Large Hadron Collider to bombard particles with particles to see where minuscule pieces of the particles disappear to, trying to prove that the higher dimensions exist. These scientists, these physicists, the quantum physicists, they all know that the higher dimensions exist. They wouldn't spend billions of dollars creating the Large Hadron Collider if they didn't already have a certainty that these higher dimensions exist. Where we part ways is, I know for a fact, the fifth dimension.
Yeah, but the high, I can't even pronounce it. That super collider, it's the whole purpose of that is to create, or not create, but to send particles at incredible speeds so that they collide with each other and sort of recreate the Big Bang. That was the whole purpose of it, so that they could do that, and then from that sort of kind of judge what happens and what happens after that point. So that was the purpose of the collider.
Has intelligent entities, and they don't know. They're totally clueless of this. I know for 100% fact because I was contacted by demonic entities, evil entities, invisible entities. If you're contacted by an invisible entity and you're not crazy and it actually happened, then you're being contacted by a higher dimensional entity. Only higher dimensional entities have the power to be invisible to us. I believe they also have the power to reveal themselves to us under certain circumstances, but perhaps even they don't have the power to fully reveal themselves. It might be based on a case-by-case scenario. These little connections represent where it's the strongest between the two dimensions, or where the barrier is the weakest. I believe if you happen to live in a house with an extremely strong link to the fifth dimension, you might be haunted on a regular basis, maybe move out. That house might be directly on a vortex. I'm not one of those hippie new age people that talks about vortexes.
But you just talked about it.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here dumbfounded what he's been saying. I'm just like, really? It's like, oh, you might think you're crazy if you're talking to demonic spirits, but I'm not crazy. It's like, Dude, you sound like you run around your house with a tinfoil hat.
Yeah, I mean, he's contradicting himself.
I think he's off his meds. I think he needs to get back on them.
Mm-hmm.
My information from people in Sedona, Arizona that believe vortexes are everywhere. But perhaps there is a vortex in Sedona. They're invisible, so you can't rule it out. I base whether there may or may not be a vortex somewhere based on the activity.
That's a good assumption. There could be an extra dimensional rubber ducky that exists in Sedona too, but we don't have any proof of it.
Experience it yourself, and then you know. But I understand if people don't believe me, if it didn't happen to you, it's very understandable. But I know for a fact a thinning of the dimensions, a strong connection between the dimensions exists in certain places on Earth. Whereas most places, there is literally no way to see, communicate, feel, sense, hear anything from the higher dimensions. And that's how it's supposed to be. Perhaps there is a cycle like a solar cycle where the sun has sun flares and the corona of the sun gets strong in parts and has huge sunspots and weak in parts. Perhaps it's a natural cycle of the universe for there to be weak spots between these membranes of these dimensions where entities can come through, they can communicate, they can harass and bother us. It has happened to me. They can look down on us and see us. They're invisible to us because if I had to guess, sixth dimensional entities are invisible to fifth dimensional entities for the very same reason. Seventh are invisible to sixth. Eighth are invisible to seventh.
What is he basing this on? Is this just his theory, his idea?
I think this is all his wild guess or his this is how it has to be theory.
Mm-hmm.
If he's saying that the veil is between the fifth and the third dimension, what about the second dimension? Why aren't we hearing about the second dimension? Sorry.
I followed his concept of the division between the fifth and the fourth dimension, and he explained it. He pretty much laid out his belief, his concept of it, but he's just sort of running through the sixth, seventh. He's running through the rest of them without really explaining any of them.
No, he's not. So, yeah. I'm wondering how much of this is his theory and how much of it he pulls off of Soccer Mom web journals.
Ninth are invisible to eighth. 10th are invisible to 9th. 11th are invisible to 10th, and so on and forever. When I talk about negative entities, I'm talking about the lower ones close to us, the fifth dimension. I do believe even higher dimensional, angelic, wonderful, loving entities do exist. And they exist in the even higher dimensions. And they can look down and they can see these evil fifth dimensional demonic entities occasionally bothering us lower fourth/third dimensional entities. They can see everything. These angelic, higher, positive entities of a higher frequency, higher vibration, higher dimension. So with all the doom and gloom, yes, there are even higher entities of higher, more positive dimensions that can look down. And I have heard, according to Buddhists, perhaps all care of the earthly world disappears when you ascend to those higher dimensions. So there is good within these dimensions. I do believe our spirit lives on forever. It's an opinion I have. I cannot prove it, but I've had too many encounters with spirits, higher dimensional entities to dismiss. As far as human ghosts, I think human ghosts are slightly higher than demons, slightly higher than evil demonic entities. I do not believe humans can become demons. I believe demons are a completely separate species, if you will, a dimensional species native to a certain dimension. And I believe us humans can ascend, similar to how the Buddhists talk about, but not exactly. I don't exactly agree with Buddhism, but my grandfather was Buddhist, and so I have read a few Buddhist books, and I actually am going to do a review of the Tibetan book of living and dying, specifically the dying chapters I want to cover. There's some interesting stuff in those chapters that I agree with and some that I disagree with. Obviously, I don't know everything. I don't claim to know everything. I'm just sharing my opinions and what I do believe to know. And I do feel strongly and am passionate about what I do know. And there was a commenter that said, "Why are you so passionate about this? There's no way you can know." When I do know for 100% fact that higher dimensional negative entities that are invisible to us are looking down on us, messing with us occasionally. The reason I'm passionate about that is because I know for a fact it is happening. It happened to me. It's really not that difficult to figure out.
He uses that word fact, and I don't think he knows what it means.
I don't think he knows any either, because I can look right at him and go, well, show me proof. Well, I can't show you proof because you'll deny it. No, if you show me legitimate proof, I may not deny it. Yeah. But he's not offering any proof. He's just saying, well, because it happened to me, therefore it has to be fact.
Biases can cause people to ignore it and shake it off like it's nothing. So it goes both ways. People claim that I have biases, but the fact of the matter is a bias can both help and it can hurt you. If it's a true bias, it can help you. If it's a false bias, it can most definitely hurt you. I try not to focus on dogma. I try to look at it from a scientific perspective. I wish scientists would look at these possibilities of communication between the fifth dimensional entities that are intelligent and us. But because such cases are extremely, extremely, extremely rare, it can't be taken to a laboratory, except perhaps if someone finds a vortex, an extremely demonic oppressed house that may or may not be a vortex, if that house is completely taken over by scientists and turned into a laboratory. Theoretically, something could come from that, but usually it's paranormal, new age, psychic people with zero credibility and zero credentials, and it becomes a news story that gets lost in the footnote of history. It'd be useful if actual scientists could take over some extremely haunted houses, but if you have seen the new Ghostbusters movie, it's common knowledge that if you were a legitimate scientist or someone in academia, you will be persecuted and treated badly and lose your job and lose anything you've built in your scientific academic career.
See, now I think that that's bullshit.
That is bullshit.
Yeah, there's all sorts of scientists who have had theories that were considered, ridiculous or whatever. For example, the idea that the universe was expanding, that was a huge one. When people theorized that the universe was expanding, especially Einstein didn't believe it. He believed that the universe was eternal and static. And then later on, they proved that the universe definitely did expand. So there are people who present ideas that are counter to the common narrative or the common model. But once it is proven and shown that that model is false, then that new theory takes over. Another example is the concept of a round Earth. It was very difficult for anybody to believe that the Earth was round, mainly because it went against the biblical concept of a round Earth, and also the whole biblical concept of the universe. And it was very difficult to get that theory across. And I'm sure that when they introduced that theory, it was, completely shunned. It was just like, oh, that's ridiculous. We'll never do it. There's no way you can prove that because it doesn't exist. So yes, scientists can come up with crazy ideas, but they're not going to be like shunned. They're not going to be laughed off the, laughed out of the classroom. It's just that it's the same thing. It's like, okay, that's a great theory, but can you prove it? If you can prove it, then they can, other people can recreate the experiment and actually verify, yes, it is proven to be a fact.
Yeah. I mean, I have seen some things where you have scientists that do flat out come out and say, yes, I believe in this and this. Do I have proof of it? Not necessarily. Would I love proof of it? I would. I mean, scientists can believe and study what they wish, and there are some scientists that do look into the paranormal and aren't seen as a joke. There are scientists who look into things that people think are just, why would you do that? And then in the end, they realize, like you said, that, they were right.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't lose your job over believing in that ghosts exist or not.
Yeah.
I have not heard a case of where that has happened in the scientific community of, you're fired because you believe in Casper the Friendly Ghost.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, of all the theories that have probably been introduced, there's probably been billions of, or let's say millions of theories that have been, that people have come up with, but only a handful of those have actually been proven to be true. So it's great to come up with theories. It's great to imagine and stuff like that. But if you're actually going to change people's minds, you actually have to, present facts and support it. So anyhow.
If you say something like ghosts are real, it's a subject that goes deep. If you've never had an encounter with a demonic entity, consider yourself lucky.
So this is based off the Galatia, this idea that you're within a magic circle, and then you have these candles, and then you have this triangle outside of the circle, and then this is where you call up the spirit, the particular spirit that you're calling up. And this looks like a fairly modern drawing of it. It's not that old. It's probably a recreation of it. But this is based off of the Galatia.
I personally have a few times here and there, mostly back in the year 2011. Hopefully, I don't have too many more in the future, but only time will tell. Even though a lot of Hollywood movies joke around with the subject, if you know enough about demonic entities, you can see what even the Hollywood writers didn't intend on adding to the movie. There's a movie called The Mothman Prophecies, which is based on sightings of an unknown alien entity, sort of like Bigfoot, very elusive, but supposedly had the properties of a moth, a giant moth, or perhaps a giant bird-like creature. And I'm going to show a clip from the movie. I was unable to do so I had to recreate the entire soundtrack and the entire dialogue between the character and the entity. This is supposedly the Mothman, or some type of entity talking to the main character. Now, this entity is clearly demonic, not extraterrestrial in any way, shape, or form. This is the most pinnacle scene of the movie, The Mothman Prophecies, but it doesn't spoil too much. And because I changed everything up, I recommend watching the movie for this scene, as it is portrayed and acted much better with the original voices.
So if you're using a fantasy movie to support your argument, your argument is probably shit.
I was going to say, because yes, this movie is loosely based off of that idea of the Mothman and what people have experienced with the Mothman, the written things and all that stuff and the tragedies that followed after seeing him. But as far as I know, the movie kind of has nothing to do with the actual prophecies. They might mention them in it. I never seen this movie though. But when you say, well, I had to recreate this, then to me, that argument that he's trying to make right now just went invalid. Because if he could show everything else that he has shown, why can't he show this?
Hello, John Klein.
Who is this?
Your father was born and raised in Wisconsin. He lived in a greenhouse on Monroe Street. You don't remember how your mother looked.
Okay, you got my attention. Where's my watch?
I'm thinking he probably had to recreate all this because of the copyright reasons.
Maybe.
In your shoe. Under the bed. Very good, John. Thank you.
What's in my hand?
Chapstick.
You're reading my mind, aren't you? Are you reading my mind?
I have no need to, do I?
What's the third line of page 51?
A broken smile beneath her whispered wings. Still more proof, John Klein.
What do you look like?
It depends on who's looking.
I want to meet you.
You already have, John.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, I haven't seen that movie.
Demonic entities, they do have the ability to stand right next to you, and you being 100% oblivious to that fact. They can look over your shoulder,
Again, I don't believe he understands what the word fact means.
and they often do. They can see what you're reading, and they often do. They can see through anything. And so they can see if you're holding a chapstick in your hand. What they rarely will do is tell you about it or have a conversation with you about it over a telephone. That much is pretty extreme. Now, I don't know if this is based on a true story, this particular scene, or if it was 100% fictional for the movie. Either way, such communications would be extremely rare and probably didn't happen. But demonic entities can see what's in your shoe under your bed. They have X-ray vision, as was covered in previous The Attributes of Demons, Occult Unmasked episodes. I personally know firsthand that demonic entities have beyond X-ray vision concerning the third dimension. They can see right through us. How do I know that? Someone asked me in the comments section, how do you know they have X-ray vision? How do you know? I know from two separate instances. One involved the 2011 poltergeist haunting. The entity, a number of times, not too many times, but enough times for me to make a mental note. That's interesting. There's no way that entity would be moving that object unless it had X-ray vision and could see through another object to move that object. And this isn't the movie Birdman. This isn't being crazy, hallucinating that things are moving around. I took, and I currently take, 0 drugs. I'm 100% sane, believe it or not. A doctor might disagree with that if that particular doctor is an atheist.
I love how he's just sort of pushed through what he's basing that on.
Yeah. The only doctors that think I'm crazy are atheists. No, I think all doctors will probably find you crazy, sir.
Yeah, well, he's claiming that he knows that entities have X-ray vision based upon something that moved, but he didn't expand on that. He then went on to saying, "Oh, yeah, well, I don't take drugs. A doctor would say that I'm rational, and yeah, I believe he's completely sane too. I just think that his conclusion is flawed, and if he went back and actually recreated his experience, he would find the where he screwed up, where he falsely interpreted certain information, and that there might be another explanation for that information, and that's why he's not expanding on it. That's why he's not explaining it. Because if he really wanted to convince his viewers of this, he would carefully walk them through it and show this is exactly why. But because he knows that it's a faulty conclusion, he's not going to recreate it.
Yep.
But I know for 100% fact that demonic entities exist. They do have X-ray vision. They have beyond X-ray vision. And they don't flaunt it. They really keep it a secret, considering the fact that most humans don't even believe they exist. So why should they come out and say, oh yeah, by the way, we have X-ray vision? So no, they don't come out and announce they have it, but they slipped up enough during the 6 months that I was poltergeist haunted that I know for a fact demons have X-ray vision. Now, what are the instances in which they slipped up? I'm writing about it, and it's not phenomenal, it's not sensational, but I'd rather keep those exact stories a bit of something saved away for my book that I'm writing. But a few years later, I did have a rare instance alluding to them also having X-ray vision. So I have those two separate dates separated. In addition to that, I have been researching enough. As you can see in my X-ray vision episode of the Attributes of Demons, a sorcerer that actually summons these things made note that the entity didn't even need to question for a second what was inside of a sealed box, because he could see straight through that sealed box. The sorcerer was telling the entity, oh, by the way, this is inside the box. The entity said, yeah, I know, I can see it. So very casually. And that's one thing I wanted to make note about from the movie Tomorrowland, was how casually the robot girl mentioned how she has X-ray vision.
Give me the Edison tube and we'll go without you.
I don't have the Edison tube.
It's in your bag. I have X-ray vision.
Where'd you get X-ray vision?
Oh, she's full of surprises.
She just extremely casually mentioned it like, oh, of course I have X-ray vision. It's not a big deal. I see it through your bag. And so that was the connection with that movie, which I forgot to mention in the X-ray episode, was how casual it was mentioned. Now, these entities, sure, they have X-ray vision. Beyond that, all 3D objects are almost connected from their higher dimensional perspective. They are, in my opinion, in the 5th dimension, but that's just a number. A slightly higher dimension is a more accurate description. Numbers are just assignments by humans. We could say they're in the 4.5th dimension, 5.6th dimension. It doesn't matter. Numbers don't matter. All that matters is they're in a slightly higher membrane, and they can look down into our membrane and see us. We look up, we cannot see them.
All right, I think I'm gonna stop it right here.
Oh man, this guy's a piece of work.
Yeah, definitely.
He's pretty much trying to lure you into buying his book so he doesn't have to repeat what he's saying.
Basically, yeah, he keeps mentioning, oh, and I sell the book. So I mean, it's really interesting. The like, for example, the whole story of the Goetia and the spirits. There's the idea that you know, that you put the spirit into a brass vessel, or the idea of the jinn being stuck in a lantern. So there is a concept that spirits somehow can be held or contained within an object. So, or excuse me, not spirits, but these demons, these entities. So if that's the case, then they would not be able to pass through it, because there would be certain things that they would not be able to penetrate. So,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? But again, that's a mythology. You know, you don't take it seriously.
No, you don't. And this guy, just by the sounds of it, takes a few things a little bit too seriously. I mean, I don't think he's 100. I think in his mind and how he's putting it, he believes he's 100% sane and the rest of the world is blind to all this. But as somebody who's been around mentally ill people and obviously has admitted that they think they're a little crazy themselves, I can look at someone, listen to what they're saying, going, yeah, you might appear sane, but what you're saying right now is crazier than fuck. Right.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, all joking aside, just because you have a flawed theory about something doesn't mean that you have, you know, some kind of a mental disability. It just means that your theory is flawed. There are other possibilities for things.
Yeah.
Like for example, let's say that, you know, you're home alone and, you know, you do something and you hear in the background something fall off a shelf or something happen, you know, and then you go and you look and you realize, you know, a glass is broken or something that fell off of something. You may sit there and go, wow, I wonder how that happened. Maybe a ghost pushed it off the shelf or whatever. But you also might find that, oh, what happened was something happened, like a neighbor or a car went by and shook the ground just enough to cause it, because it was precariously on this shelf and it fell over, you know.
Yeah.
There are other explanations for things. And if you have looked at something and you've eliminated all possible explanations for something, and you still are left with being able to completely not explain it, then maybe you can start looking into other possibilities for why that particular thing happened. But
exactly.
If you immediately jump to the first conclusion of, oh, well, it was a ghost that pushed it off the shelf, then yeah, that's flawed.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it from more than one perspective, then it's a lot easier to poke holes in your first theory and your second theory sometimes. I mean, yeah, I live in an apartment situation, so I hear weird noises all the time. 95% of the time, I'm pretty sure it's my neighbors that live above me.
Mm-hmm.
Or the people that live next door. I mean, earlier today there was some weird sounds and someone was asleep and I was up by myself, and then I kind of stopped and listened to them hard and realized it was something the neighbor was watching upstairs, turned up on a high volume.
Right.
But I do wonder, because he's refusing to put out any evidence that goes against what he's claiming.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm taking almost everything he's saying and his supposed experience with probably a grain of salt, because I don't know his experience, and also he's not listening to any other arguments, obviously, if he's claiming his is right and anyone who goes against him is wrong.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. Well, I think that's pretty much about it, and we'll end this here. Let me see. What was the time? It was 55:49.
Awesome.
Okay. So we can start up on this next week, and we'll see what happens next week. Hopefully, maybe Dorian will be able to join us. He might not, and
Yeah.
that's fine if he needs to take some time off. So, and then let's see. And then I guess in what, 3 weeks we'll have the D&D adventure, huh?
Yep. In about 3 weeks, we'll have D&D time.
All right. All right. Well, is there any last thing you want to say? I think we'll just go ahead and end it about 10 minutes early.
Yeah, that's fine. And I'd like to thank everybody for showing up and talking and being your normal kooky selves, regardless of whoever disliked the video. Well, boo on you. But other than that, I hope everybody has a great week.
Yep. All right. Thanks all. Take care. And thank you, Loki. And have a good night, everybody. Blessed be.
Good night, all.